Your Creative Push, episode 254.
Just go for it. Whatever happens to click for you is the thing that you should be pursuing.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Noah Bradley. Noah is an artist who is best known for his work on the Magic the Gathering cards, as well as his personal project, The Sin of Man. And Noah is also known for this little article he wrote about why you should not go to art school. And we dive deep into that later in the episode. Noah also talks about how he started out and became a landscape and environmental artist, and also being plagued with a desire to move on to another piece as opposed to finishing the one that he is working on currently. He talks about what it's like to work for Wizards of the Coast and doing art for Magic the Gathering, and also the difficulty that he has in scheduling his life and knowing where he's going to be the next day. Noah also gives his advice for people who have difficulty keeping self-imposed deadlines and holding themselves accountable, and quitting social media and what has happened since he made that decision. Just a really great episode with a guy who thinks about the life and the path of an artist in a very different way. So this episode is definitely going to inspire you and also get you to think a little bit differently about the way that people tell you that you should approach your creative life. So please do enjoy my conversation with Noah Bradley. Noah, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I read this piece that you wrote called How I Became an Artist. It's a really in-depth kind of look into your career, and I suggest that everybody kind of check that out. But my favorite part of it was your list that you wrote shortly before your 18th birthday of all the things that you potentially could be, and then you chose one and went with it. And I think the choices were like programmer, graphic designer, carpenter, and artist. So maybe could we start with you telling us what it was that made you choose artist?
It was a number of things, but the commonality that I saw in all of those things was that I really liked making stuff, whatever that stuff happened to be. In programming, I liked making, games and stuff like that. In graphic design, I liked making, products or whatever. Carpentry, obviously, you're building stuff, and then art, you're making, pretty pictures for people. So there's always this common thread of making stuff for me. So I knew no matter what I was going to do, I was going to make something. For my own happiness, I can't just sit around and not make something. If at the end of the day, I don't have something tangible in my hands or on a screen that I made, I don't really feel happy with how productive I was that day. So I knew I wanted to make something. And for me, art, even though I wasn't extremely good at it at the time, had this eternal challenge that it offered me. I knew I could never fully master art. I knew I could always get a little bit better at it. I knew I could always explore a little bit more. And sure, those other disciplines had that as well, but they didn't quite have that same sort of deep appeal to me that art seemed to.
Yeah, I think that eternal challenge is something that actually holds some people back, knowing that they can never reach this pinnacle. They can never reach this end goal. So why is it that it kind of encouraged you, on the other hand, to go for it?
I think there's always been something about that I really like. I really like being challenged. I like learning. I like growing. I like improving. I don't just like producing. I don't like doing the same thing again and again. I don't like hitting that pinnacle. I like to always be in that state of growth as much as I can.
Well, and you also mentioned that the moment you chose artist, that's when the fear began. So can you talk about that fear? Because I think that's something that a lot of us go through.
Well, yeah, the fear is always there. I am always terrified. A little bit less so now than I was when I was starting out, for sure. Now that I've quote unquote made it, it does get a little bit easier. But certainly when I started out, I was absolutely terrified because I saw so many people that would try to do something like art or other creative professions and just fail miserably. They would, study art for years and years, and then they would have to get a normal job and not make their art. And after a few years of trying and failing, they would just give up and be that person that could kind of draw, but was working some job that was completely unrelated to it. And I knew that if I was going to go into this, I wanted to do really, really well at it. And not just really well on a technical level, but also on a, professional and even monetary level. I didn't want to, be a starving artist. That never appealed to me at all. I wanted to do pretty well with art. So that was always a goal for me. And I set myself the ridiculous deadline of doing so by the time I graduated art school, which was only a few short years away by the time I had, decided to be an artist. So it was quite the goal, but it certainly kept me motivated. There's something about terror that really keeps me moving.
Yeah, terror is the greatest motivator, I think. So you went to school, and can you talk about that process a little bit? Because I think that's something that we're probably going to get into, is the idea of art school. So can you talk about your kind of school journey?
My school journey is sort of all over the map, literally and figuratively. I grew up homeschooled and loved that. It was wonderful. I started going to community college at a very young age, taking all sorts of subjects, among them art. And then eventually, I went to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, and studied there for a year, took on enormous amounts of debt, and then transferred out of there for my last 2 years of art school, where I graduated from the Virginia Commonwealth University, where I graduated with less debt than I would have from RISD, which was wonderful.
Yay.
And and then eventually got out of art school and entered the professional freelancing world.
So those are two wonderful schools. Can you talk about what transition happened when you went to VCU then? Because Shane Madden was on the show before, and he mentioned you because he was talking about developing a niche and becoming like the guy or the girl for a particular thing. And he had mentioned you because of your landscape and your environmental art. And I think maybe this is probably a good place to ask that question. Like, how did you decide that you wanted to become an environment and landscape artist?
I sort of fell into it. I never intended to. In fact, I didn't ever really like landscapes. I didn't like landscape painting at all. I've always been a bit of a nature guy. I grew up in the country. I like hiking. I like going out and exploring and stuff like that. But there was something about landscape painting that I just found really, really boring. And at some point during those last couple of years in art school, I did a few digital sketches of landscapes, as well as doing a lot of plein air work, going outside and going into nature and actually painting from life. That was a pretty big moment for me because that was the first time in my whole life that I actually really liked doing landscape work. And that was very pivotal. So at that point, I started doing these digital landscape sketches and stuff like that, just on my own, outside of my classwork. And I discovered that I really, really liked it. It was really fun. It was really refreshing for me. And as it turns out, I was also fairly good at it. I didn't mean to be good at it, but for whatever reason, people started really responding to those far more than they were responding to any of my other pieces. And I was kind of confused, a little bit disappointed, and also kind of excited because here was this new thing that, as it turns out, I was kind of good at and also really liked doing. So for about a year then, I started pushing that really, really hard and studying it a lot, doing a ton of master studies, photo studies, and doing a ton of my own pieces. And within probably about a year and a half of doing those studies, I had hit a professional level of landscape work. And so that was a really exciting thing. And then I did become, as you were saying, that guy. I became that guy for landscapes. And that was how I got my start in freelancing. And I really don't think that if I had not been that guy, I would have gotten that start. Because at least at that time, there just weren't that many environment artists out there that specialized in it. There are now, but back then, a few years back, there just weren't that many. And I was good enough. My skills were good enough to be professional, but just barely. But really the only thing that stood out about my work at the time is that I had specialized in something that nobody else was specializing in.
Now, would you have any advice for somebody who maybe is in that same situation or finds themselves getting into a same situation where they're maybe dabbling in something different than they originally thought that they were going to kind of specialize in, and like they're realizing that people are really gravitating towards it, and they might have that weird feeling of like confusion, disappointment / excitement? Would you have any advice for them?
Just go for it. Whatever happens to click for you is the thing that you should be pursuing. And it's often not the thing you originally set out to do. Like, I wanted to be an in-house concept artist doing characters. I don't like working in-house, as it turns out. I don't like doing concept art all that much, as it turns out. And I really don't like doing characters all that much. So I really failed at all of the aspects of what I had originally planned to do with my art. Instead, I am a freelance environment illustrator, which if you had told me that, 7, 8, 9 years ago or something like that, before I started doing environments, I would have shuddered because it sounds terrible. I didn't really want to be, any of those things. But as it turns out, that's what I really like doing. And that's also what I'm quite good at doing.
I love it. Yeah. You also mentioned in that article I mentioned completing your first like piece to fruition, and how you would kind of be plagued with this like idea of getting sick of something and moving on to the next thing. Do you still have that where you're like in the middle of doing a certain piece and you want to move on to the next thing, or have you kind of moved past that?
Oh no, it's definitely still there. I still cannot wait to finish a piece. Not always. Sometimes I will get into a piece and will really like the process of it. And there will be moments that I really want to keep working on something. But typically by the end of it, I am really sick of it and really want to be done with it.
So have you developed kind of a plan for when those like feelings come over you? Like, do you grant yourself that, like the ability to go on to the next thing, or do you like make sure that you finish the piece first and then move on?
Yes and no. On the one hand, yeah, I'm fine with moving on to the next piece, but at the same time, I've sort of set a standard for what I want my work to look like. And that's my main focus, more so than necessarily how much I'm enjoying any given part of the process. So for me, the end result is kind of what dictates how long I need to spend on it and how hard I need to work on something. And unfortunately, that means I usually need to spend a long time on pieces now. The things that I want to do with my work right now happen to take a very, very long time, which is somewhat unfortunate given how impatient I am.
Yeah, but there is something to be said about a finished piece. There's that's what you're there for. So don't keep having these unfinished pieces that are just like building up and building up, because they can sometimes overwhelm you. I know that for me, for writing, that definitely happens, and I know a lot of artists and photographers and any kind of creative person, you have all these ideas floating through your head and you just want to get to them all like right now, but there's so much value in actually like shipping and actually finishing something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I could sit around doing sketches all day long and I'd be happy, but I'd never really establish myself as like a really good professional artist. Nobody would really know me for anything because all I had was, half finished stuff.
Well, before we move on to like the whole like art school thing and then your art camp, I wanted to talk about what it's like to work for Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering. It's a game that I never played, but a lot of the people around me, because I used to play poker for a living, and a lot of the ex-Magic players would play poker.
Oh yeah,
and they would play Magic as well, and I got to know a little bit of it, and I've seen the cards and stuff, and I've always been really envious of the artists. Like, they're really beautiful cards. So could you talk about what it's like to work for them?
They're wonderful to work for. They're without a doubt one of the best clients I've ever had. The whole art team there is very good. In the freelance illustration industry, you get a lot of hit or miss art directors. Some will be great, some will be pretty terrible, if we're being honest. And I will say that for Wizards, all of their Magic art directors that I've worked for have been absolutely wonderful. They give really good advice, and they give just the right amount of advice. You often find a bad art director feels the need to over art direct. They feel the need to nitpick every little thing rather than focusing on the overall piece and the sort of advice that you need to hear as an artist. And I find that the magic art directors do a wonderful job of just picking out the advice that you really need to hear to make the best pieces that you can for them. So they're a wonderful company. They give us fun assignments. They give us enough time to work on the assignments, and they're really nice people.
Very cool. I also wanted to ask you about, you did this thing at AluxCon. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Where you gave away free prints. And I was just wondering if you could take us back to your mindset then about giving away free prints and putting yourself out there in that way.
So at the time, there was this little one-night showcase thing at this event, and they still do it to this day. And at the time, I had been, I believe, 1 or 2 years before. I don't recall which at the time, but at this thing, they would always sell prints of their work. All the exhibiting artists would sell prints. And, I talked to some of the artists, and they would sell maybe 1 or 2 prints, it seemed like. They weren't making a lot of money at this thing. And they were mainly just there to show off their work. And so when I was set to exhibit for my first time, I knew that I really didn't care about a few bucks. Like it didn't make a difference whether I made $40 or $0. It's not a lot of money. I don't really care. I would much rather just show off my work. But I still wanted to make some prints, and I still wanted to get my name out there and my work out there as much as possible. So I looked at the whole print thing, and I was like, well, why don't I just give them away? It's a few $100 investment to make a large run of prints, enough for basically everybody in the room, and I could just give them away, and nobody else would be doing that, so everyone's going to take a print. And so I did just that, and it was a huge success. My work was, good enough. It wasn't anything exceptional, I'd say, but it was good enough. I was a new artist, and people were kind of interested in this whole free print thing, because who doesn't want a free print to put on their wall? If the art is at least good enough. So it was a very, very big success, and did serve my purpose of just getting my name out there, and got me kind of talked about and noticed by a lot of people that I ended up working for years later.
It's so cool. Now, you mentioned something that you knew nobody else was going to be doing it. And I think that might stop a lot of people that are listening from doing something similar. Like they might get this idea like, oh, I could do this and get myself out there in this way. And maybe that's a great idea, but they're scared to do it because nobody else has done it. So would you have any advice for them to kind of get that bravery to, maybe it will be like a small investment on their part, and it might be like a little bit of putting themselves out there in an uncomfortable way, but doing it anyway?
I would encourage people to almost lean into that. I usually find that anytime I've done something fairly exceptional in my career, it's been the times that I've done something that nobody else was doing. It's been the times when I saw the normal way, the normal route of doing things, and just did something entirely different. And that's usually been a pretty big success for me. So if you find yourself kind of uncomfortable with an idea, or not sure about it, or doubting yourself, or a little bit scared to do something, you should probably look into that idea, because there might be something really, really good there.
I love it. I was wondering, do you have any resistances, any things that hold you back from getting to your work on a daily basis now? We talked a little bit already about some of the fears that you had earlier in your career, and still do, I guess, a little bit. And also the idea of not being able to finish stuff or wanting to move on to the next thing.
Right.
Are there any other like random things that hold you back on a daily basis that maybe we could learn from?
There's probably a lot of things. I do have a tremendous difficulty paying attention. Getting diagnosed with ADD made a whole lot of sense. So that made a lot of sense. My brain is constantly jumping around, and I have a hell of a time focusing on one thing at a time. So figuring that out and learning to pay attention a little bit better has been a big thing for me. And then also just my life schedule tends to be a little bit erratic, to put a nice spin on it. Just scheduling this interview here was quite a thing. Scheduling anything in my life is quite a thing. I don't put many things on my calendar just because I don't know necessarily which country I'm going to be in. I travel way too much, which means I don't really get the nice little comforting routine that most people get to enjoy. Most people don't appreciate, I don't think, the joy of waking up in the same bed every day, or knowing where you're going to sleep at night, or where you're going to eat, or anything like that. But I travel a whole lot. I've been on the road probably most of the months out of this year, and it's fun. And I'm so glad I get to do it. I'm so thankful for it. But it also has made working during those times very difficult. It means that my work setup is suboptimal, again, to put a nice spin on it. I have to work with whatever I can keep in a backpack, basically. So I don't get to have a nice big setup most of the time when I'm working. I get to have a laptop and a small tablet, and I'm working in some cramped cafe, and it's noisy, and the glare on my screen is terrible. And that's how I have to get all my work done. And maybe I don't even have Wi-Fi for a few days because I'm out in the mountains somewhere.
No.
And still I have to, find a way to get work and send work to clients and stuff like that. So I will say that life scheduling is a hell of a problem, but hopefully that's somewhat temporary. And at some point in my life, I'll be able to wake up in the same bed every day.
Right. And you'll probably look back fondly on it too. Just the ability to travel around and stuff. So what exactly where are you traveling, and what's that like?
Right this second, I am just in Virginia hanging out. So this is sort of a little bit of downtime. But I'm about to do a couple events. I'm heading up to Canada for an event soon. Heading down to Peru for just a fun trip. Heading back over to the UK. I just got back from Norway, which was beautiful and amazing. And a mix of fun trips as well as more work trips where I'm going to an event to either exhibit or something like that.
Very cool, man. Well, I first of all, thank you very much for scheduling us in. And I know how tough that can be when you don't, first of all, when you don't know where you're going to sleep. But second of all, when you don't know where you're going to get your next Wi-Fi. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure when you sent me the email, I was like, oh, God, am I going to have Wi-Fi when this interview happens? So I just never know.
Yeah, I got you. Well, thank you very much, man. All right, now let's get into the whole don't go to art school thing, because you wrote this piece that went somewhat viral about why you believe that people should not go to art school. So can you talk a little bit about the mindset behind that?
So I wrote this thing, and I thought it would be a nice little article that a few people would read, and then it would go away. And that's not at all what happened. I wrote this article and everyone read it, and it exploded way bigger than I ever thought it would. I managed to, shall we say, piss off all the art schools out there, which I was actually fine with. I'm totally okay with it. So I went into it with a mindset of being pretty darn annoyed at art schools. I talked to a lot of my friends, both professional and students and stuff like that. And I was talking to them about how much debt they had. And they just had tremendous amounts of debt. And I would talk to guys in their 30s and 40s, thoroughly professional, had wonderful careers, and they still had student loan debt. And these were older guys when art school was a bit cheaper than it was now. And I looked at the rising prices, and it was just astronomical. Students were going to these schools for 4 years and ending up just with obscene amounts of debt. And it just drove me crazy. I just got really, really annoyed at art schools. I knew, at that point as a professional artist, I had a pretty good idea of how much artists make. And, I do all right as an artist. I make a good living. But I also saw that paying off a 6-figure loan is ridiculous for anyone in the art field. It's obscene. And $100,000 debt, which is, low compared to what you could have graduating from art school, would still take $1,000 every month for 10 years to pay off. assuming you don't even have like a really bad interest rate, it would take 10 years to pay that off. And $1,000 every month is not a small amount of money. In fact, it's quite a lot of money. And that's just 100,000. A lot of people would graduate with 200,000. And that's just ridiculous for what art school provides its students. It is a just ridiculous amount of money. And there's a lot of problems behind it, and I've looked into it a lot. And it has to do with everything from, the student loan companies to the government actually backing them, to the fact that you can't get out of these student loans even with bankruptcy. There's a lot of sort of cascading problems that cause these schools to just charge stupid amounts of money and have no consequences for doing so. And this was just really, really annoying me. As you might be able to tell, I wrote the darn thing 4 or 5 years ago, and I still get annoyed at this stuff. Art schools are still just the same. They still charge ridiculous prices for very, very little value.
Right. Well, the bubble hasn't burst yet.
It will burst. I'm fairly certain, if you want to get into theories here, I'm fairly certain the global economy will crash in 5 to 10 years from the student loan debt industry. But, if you want to make wide sweeping predictions on things, that's what I would say. If I knew how to bank on all of the economy crashing because of that, I would invest all of my money.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, there you go. Bitcoin. Always Bitcoin. It's the future. Anyways, so I graduated with $40,000 in debt, and I consider myself blessed that it was only $40,000. And $40,000 is a lot of money. It's still a lot of money, and I paid them off, and I feel quite proud that I managed to do that. But still, the idea of paying off 3 times as much as that is terrifying to me. The idea of paying off 5 times as much of that just feels impossible. Now, there are fields out there that it kind of makes sense for you to go into at least some amount of debt to pay for your education. When you're going into a field where you're going to make 6 figures, yeah, sure, go for it. If you're guaranteed a 6-figure salary when you pop out of school, sure, it's maybe not a terrible idea. It might not be the best idea, but it's not terrible. Whereas artists, guess what? Are probably not going to start at 6 figures. They're going to be lucky to do anything in their first years. I believe the failure rate for art school graduates is something like 95% within 5 years. That many are not working in art at all. And I believe by their definition of art, working in an art supply store is working in the art field. So even that is a liberal look at things. So it's laughable that they're still getting away with it and they're still doing this stuff. And I would just encourage that anyone who is thinking about art school to give it a lot of thought. There are a lot of options out there that will save you a lot of money and will not put you in crippling debt for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And the scariest thing is for especially creative people, when you're coming out of school and you're trying to figure out a way to make money from your art, it's like not like the right mindset that you want to be in. You don't want to have this like huge, most of the time 6-figure number that's just like weighing over you as you're trying to figure this thing out. It's just like such a crippling thing. And I think that the reason that article that you wrote went viral is because people know that you're right, but it's also, well, can you maybe talk about Art Camp then? Because I think that's there are a lot of options for people to still learn with the internet being the way that it is, and there's so many great resources. This is something that I try to promote all the time is, you can learn anything on YouTube. You can learn anything for a very small fraction of the cost of what it costs to go to school by doing some things like Art Camp. So could you talk about Art Camp?
Sure. So Art Camp is a program I started up about 4 years ago now. It covers a lot of the fundamental aspects of how to learn art. There's a lot of different ways to study art, and I wanted to break down what I consider the best, most effective ways to study art. Because a lot of people get this motivation that they really want to learn art, and they have no idea what to do. Like, what do you actually do? Like, I want to learn art, so what do I do? Do I draw Apple? Do I, do a study of something? What's a study like? What am I supposed to think about? And there were all these really basic questions. And even though, sure, at the time I wasn't some, big, amazing professional, greatest painter in the world, that's not who I was, nor did I pretend to be. I was an artist who had made it as a professional, and I knew a fair bit about how to learn art because I had learned it. And I had read a lot of books on art and how to learn art. And I knew a lot of people just wouldn't do that. I would recommend these books and people just wouldn't read them. And so all this information is out there. It's fairly easy to find, all things considered, but it takes a while to find all of it. And so Art Camp is just sort of me boiling down all of this information I've gathered into a very concise, easy to understand format that you can just do these things and don't question it. Just do these exercises. Trust me. And I promise you'll get better. And you can do other exercises if you feel like it. Go for it. And if you learn more from those, that's great. But for me, these are the ones that have always seemed to be the most effective ones. And so, as you said, there's a lot of resources out there, and a lot of free ones, a lot of cheap ones, a lot of very, very affordable options just online that you can just sit in your room and study and learn how to make art. And after years and years of teaching art, I've come to the realization that making art and learning the skills to make art is not really that complicated. Most of what people need is just a lot of time put into actually learning this stuff. Most artists at the end of the day are, in at least some ways, self-taught. Even, if someone takes art camp, I would still consider them a fairly self-taught artist. I wouldn't consider them, educated by me. They're learning this stuff themselves because you still have to make all the connections yourself. And no matter if you have the greatest teacher in the world, these realizations are going to come to you sort of on your own. So the main thing you need is time. You just need to put a lot of time into this stuff. And there are a ton of resources out there that you can check out. On top of that, if you do work better in a structured environment, and for myself, I know that I would. If I look back and would go back and do it all over again, I would actually not probably study at home and try to use online resources exclusively. I don't think I would have done super well with that because I know how I work and I know what I need to learn. And for me, I would benefit from a classroom setting. I think I learn better when I have deadlines and a classroom and other people working around me. And so for me, I would probably go to one of these atelier programs, which are much smaller programs, more focused, more technically minded, and frankly, just better than art school. And they're way, way cheaper. You can go to one of these for, a couple $1,000s a semester rather than $20,000 a semester.
Right. I agree with you. And I think that's one of the good things about art school is that it forces you to do the work. It gives you deadlines and it makes you put in that time. Would you have any advice for somebody who wants to go the full, just watching videos and learning on their own, but maybe struggle like you were saying, and probably like me too, where like you just
Right.
need those deadlines and you need somebody to tell you this is due at this point, or you need to tell yourself that. Would you have any advice for them to be able to kind of adhere to that and to be able to put in that time that they kind of desperately need to put into it?
Yeah, I think there's a few options. So if you really are self-motivated enough and can hold yourself accountable, then you can just set deadlines for yourself. And if you're capable of doing that, good for you. I cannot do that for the life of me. I'm terrible at setting deadlines. If I set a deadline for myself, I will ignore it in no time.
Yeah.
I know I will. I don't even bother setting deadlines for myself because I know I will just blow through them and I won't care. Yeah, I won't feel bad about it, anything like that. So for me, the main thing that has helped me is making it more habitual rather than a decision, rather than something I have to do. So if I just get up and every day, the first thing I do is an hour worth of painting, then every single day, that's just what I'm going to do, no matter what. It's not one of those I have a choice about it. It's not that I'm thinking about it. It's not that I'm willing myself to do it in the morning. It's just that that's what I do. I just I get up and do that every day. And so if you can find ways to make it a habit rather than a decision, that can be a really, really huge thing. The other thing I would suggest for people is finding a way to incorporate accountability into it. And by that, I mean external accountability, other people that will hold you to those deadlines or hold you to doing studies, whether that's a friend group or other peers, whether online or locally, that will all sort of be in this together. And that camaraderie and that sort of accountability can be a really, really good motivator. If you know that your friend is working a couple hours today, you're going to feel kind of guilty when you tell him, oh yeah, I didn't really do anything today. And no, I don't really have any reason why I didn't do anything. I was just being lazy. So if you've got that sort of peer pressure almost, it's really, really going to help you make that more habitual in your life.
Well, some places you can find accountability is by building an audience online as well. And you just left social media. So could you talk a little bit about the mindset behind that?
Yeah, I really like, at this point in my life and this point in my career, disappearing. I want to get away from everything. I got to this point, and it kind of helped that while I was having these thoughts, I was actually quite literally sitting in a hammock on the beach. Believe it or not, that really gives you some good thinking.
Yeah.
So I was thinking in this hammock on the beach in this beautiful sunny day with a nice breeze and a nice drink in my hand that I really just don't care about social media that much. And believe it or not, I realized there's more important things in life. There's personal connections that I can have with people. There's one-on-one in-depth conversations I can have. There's experiences I can live. There's people I can see face to face. And there's work that I can create and focus on just creating. And I realized that all of these things mattered to me a lot more than a few more likes on a certain social media platform. And I've also gotten to the certain point in my career that I can kind of ignore that stuff and be just fine. When I was starting out in my career, I was absolutely terrified, as we mentioned earlier. And I was desperate to be a success and wanted to get my work out there in every conceivable way. At this point in my career, though, I don't really need to do that anymore. And that might sound cocky or arrogant, but it's not. If you do this stuff for long enough, you're going to get to a point when you can actually get a little bit more comfortable, when your work sort of spreads itself, when it speaks for itself. And I think to some degree, I've kind of gotten there. And I'll be honest that even though I've left social media, I've still gotten plenty of job offers coming into my inbox, probably more than I really need or want. So even though I don't promote myself at all, I still get plenty of work. So I didn't really need social media. It was just a negative for me. It was something that was distracting me. It was emotionally stressful at times. There was just too much drama, and I just didn't care. I really, really didn't care about it. And again, sitting in the hammock probably helped, but I just didn't care. I just didn't want to do it. And as soon as I left, and as soon as I got off all the social media and stuff like that, it was wonderful. It was just a breath of fresh air. I just didn't have that thing in my life distracting me. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Nice. Disappearing.
Yes.
And
yeah.
you don't miss it.
Oh no, God no. I do not miss it at all. I dread it. And I'd like to disappear more. That's right. All it's made me want to do is hide in a cave on an island and paint in my cave and don't show anyone my paintings and just hide. I just want to disappear.
Yeah, I think that's the dream for a lot of people is they just want to just do the work, just get to the work. And I think that social media does offer some valuable tools for artists that are just getting their name out there. But yeah, it's like one of those things where it's like a double-edged sword because it can kind of overtake your life as well. And not just social media. I think it's just like, it's amazing to me. Like I deal poker for a living and like as I'm dealing poker, watching everybody on their cell phones and I'm like, guys, we have a game going on here. Like, come on. Like, you know what I mean? Like everybody is just focused on what's going on the screen, whether it's reading news or catching up with, whatever gossip's going on. And it's just so important to just like turn your phone off and pick your head up and realize that like there's other people around you that you could be like having a conversation with in real life,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So Before we let you go, I also wanted to ask you about The Sin of Man.
Hmm.
Could you talk about that personal project?
So this has sort of been something brewing for many, many years now. For a long time, I sort of kind of in my head connected a lot of the pieces that I was doing for myself, but I never really quantified it into a cohesive world. And so in the past few years, I've started to really push this project in terms of writing, in terms of dedicated paintings for it. And it's something that I'll probably continue working on for a number of years to come. And it's sort of this strange primal fantasy world of cavemen and weird faceless creatures and strange things. It's a very strange, semi-disturbing world, but also kind of peaceful. So yeah, I like that stuff. It's everything that I like to paint in one world, and I just have a blast doing it. And at some point, it'll probably become a book, and I have some plans for some other stuff beyond that. But for now, it's just what I really like painting.
And now, do you ever find yourself like frustrated, like that you don't have enough time to get to that work because you're doing other freelance work or work that you quote have to do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just this morning, I'm working on freelance jobs, and I have this giant oil painting that I'm working on for myself that I'm just dying to work on, and I can't because I've got a freelance. And so it's rare that that happens. Most of the time, I'm able to balance my time enough that I have time for both. But right this second, I'm a little bit overwhelmed with freelance work.
Does that motivate you to push through the freelance work more so that you can get to that thing? Is it almost like a good thing to have that like side project that you're just like salivating for?
Yeah, it definitely motivates me. But again, going back to being eager to finish pieces, the problem is that my standards just keep increasing for my own work, and so I'm not able to rush things like I used to. And I know that's a terrible thing to say about my old work, but yeah, I totally rushed some paintings in the past. And I feel worse and worse about rushing pieces the more I develop my own taste for my own work.
Noah, it is time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today. And just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their creative passions or push them to pursue their own creative careers.
I will say that all of this stuff is totally doable. I do not do anything overly exceptional. I am not more talented than any other artist. I am not capable of working harder than any other artist. I am just a normal guy who happened to work hard enough and for long enough and to get lucky enough to make all of this a reality. And so if you really want to do this stuff, if you want to make a life out of this, or even you just want to do it on your own time as a side hobby, that's great. Just put in a lot of work, put in a lot of dedicated, focused work, and just keep doing it. And eventually you'll get lucky.
I love it. Noah, man, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. You can find links to everything we talked about today at our show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Noah Bradley, or you can find Noah at his website, which is noahbradley.com, and pretty much the only place that people can find you these days, right?
Yeah, and just follow me now before I disappear even more.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for coming out of the woodwork and not disappearing completely and coming on the show
Not
today,
yet.
man.
Not yet. All right, thanks, man.
Oh, great stuff from Noah. My thanks again to him for coming on the show. Two things I want to mention. Number one, be open. Be open to what people respond to. Just because you set out to go down a particular artistic or creative path, it doesn't mean that that definitely has to be your path. Like Noah said, he never thought that he was going to be a landscape and environmental artist, but that's just the thing that clicked because people responded to it in a positive way. And then it got him thinking, maybe this is for me. So just be open to what people respond to. Dip your toes into other things, try other things out, and then see what sticks. And don't be afraid to do that. And the second thing is, of course, the whole art school thing. And I'm not necessarily telling you to not go to art school or to quit art school or that art school is even a bad thing. I think it's a great thing for a lot of people. But my advice is to think about the path that you're going down and why you're going down it. The decisions that you're making to get to your ultimate goal as a creative person. Are you making the decision to go to art school because people tell you that that's the only way to become an artist? And do you actually realize how much it's going to cost you? Have you planned out and looked at the raw data, the number? And do you even understand what that number means? I know for me, it took me a long time to figure out the value of money. So I want you to just really think hard about the decisions that you're making, whether it's going to art school or paying for a course or signing a lease for a studio, any type of big decision like that. Just make sure that you're doing it for the right reason and that reason is going to pay off for you in the long run. On our next episode, we have Shawnee Sheldon. Shawnee has been teaching high school art for 20 years, and she comes on the show to share her journey, what brought her to be an artist and what brought her to be a teacher. And she also shares how she gets to her own personal work, despite the fact that she has all these young creative minds that are going on their own creative journeys. You can check her out on Instagram. She is The Plum Dog, and we'll have that linked up at today's show notes page as well at yourcreativepush.com/254. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next time if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go get some great work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.